used to think the most dangerous thing in a marriage was infidelity. I was wrong. The most dangerous thing is realizing the person sleeping next to you sees you not as a partner, but as an opportunity. When I married Daniel, everyone said I was lucky. He was confident, well-spoken, the kind of man who could walk into a room and make people listen. At family dinners, he'd squeeze my hand and say things like, "I couldn't have done any of this without Sonia." People smiled at us like we were a perfect picture. What they didn't see was how his grip tightened when no one was watching. At first, it was subtle. Small comments disguised as concern. "You work too hard. Let me take care of things. Money stresses you out. I'm better with numbers." I told myself this was marriage sharing responsibility, trusting your spouse. Still, every time he talked about my savings, a strange chill crawled up my spine. He asked questions that felt rehearsed. Exact amounts, account types, access details. He never forgot anything related to my money, but he forgot birthdays, anniversaries, even promises he made the night before. The first real crack came 6 months into the marriage. I was looking for a receipt on his laptop when a notification popped up, an email preview he hadn't closed fast enough before leaving the room. The subject line read, "Asset transfer timeline." My heart started pounding so loud I was sure the walls could hear it. I didn't open it. Not yet. I needed to be sure, because once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. And if I was wrong, I'd destroy my marriage with suspicion alone. That night, Daniel wrapped his arm around me in bed and kissed my forehead. "You trust me, right?" he asked casually. I stared into the darkness. "Of course," I said, but my body betrayed me. My shoulders were stiff, my jaw locked, my instincts were screaming. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became impossible to ignore. He pushed harder about joint accounts. He insisted on simplifying our finances. He even joked once, laughing a little too hard, "What's yours is mine anyway." I stopped sleeping. Instead, I listened. I watched. I remembered everything. One evening, I came home early and heard his voice from the kitchen, low and sharp. "She won't notice," he said into the phone. "She never checks." I felt something inside me break, not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly, like a final thread snapping. In that moment, my fear turned into clarity. He wasn't planning a future with me. He was planning an exit, with my money in his pocket. And that's when I made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't panic. I would let him think he was winning. Because the most satisfying revenge doesn't come from anger. It comes from patience. Once I accepted the truth, everything about Daniel became clearer, almost predictable. His affection increased overnight. Compliments I hadn't heard in months suddenly flowed freely. He started cooking dinner, leaving sweet notes on the counter, kissing my cheek before work. To anyone else, it would have looked like a husband trying harder. To me, it felt like bait. I began noticing how often he watched me when I was on my phone. How his questions were timed just right, never too obvious, never too aggressive. "Did you ever move that money out of your old account? You still using the same bank? Your business payout, is that liquid or tied up?" I answered vaguely, smiled, acted unsure. I let my voice carry hesitation, the kind that makes people underestimate you. Inside, my mind was sharp, focused, recording every word like evidence in a trial. That's when I started preparing quietly. I booked a consultation with a lawyer during my lunch break. Sitting in my car with the windows rolled up, heart racing as I explained everything in a whisper. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded and said, "You're smart to act now." Next came the financial advisor. We spoke in hypotheticals. I asked what someone could do if they suspected attempted fraud by a spouse. He laid out options like chess moves, defensive ones, strategic ones. Every night, I came home and played my role perfectly. I asked Daniel for advice. I let him explain things slowly, like I was a child. I thanked him for protecting me, and he loved it. His confidence grew reckless. He stopped hiding his calls, left papers on the desk. One evening, I pretended to scroll on my phone while listening to him talk openly to someone in the next room. "The accounts will be in my name temporarily," he said. "Once it clears, I'll move it." She signed most of it already. My stomach turned cold. He believed his own lie that I was careless, trusting, easy to control. That night, lying beside him, I stared at the ceiling again. But this time, There was no fear, only calculation. Every step he thought he was ahead, I was already 3 moves beyond. I began copying files, photographing documents, saving emails to a secure drive he didn't know existed. I checked timestamps, names, amounts. Then I did the most important thing of all. I waited, because I knew men like Daniel didn't stop when they were close. They rushed. They got greedy. And greed always leaves fingerprints. A week later, he slid a new document across the table, smiling like he'd already won. Just one more thing to make everything official, he said. I picked up the pen, paused, and signed, exactly where my lawyer told me to. Daniel leaned back, satisfied, already imagining a future built on my silence. He didn't realize that with that signature, he hadn't secured my money. He'd signed his own confession, and the moment he tried to take the next step, everything would collapse. After I signed that document, something in Daniel shifted. He became lighter, almost cheerful. The tension he used to carry in his shoulders disappeared, replaced by the smug ease of a man who believed the game was over. He whistled while getting dressed, hummed while scrolling through his phone. At night, he slept deeply like someone with no fears left. I watched him the way you watch a storm from behind glass. Calm on the outside, dangerous underneath. 2 days later, he told me he had a business meeting out of town. He packed carefully, took his laptop, and kissed me longer than usual before leaving. Everything's finally falling into place, he said. I smiled and wished him luck. The second his car pulled away, I moved. I called my lawyer first, then the bank, then my financial advisor. Every step had already been planned. All I had to do was follow the order. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. It was as if my body understood this was survival, not revenge. By the time Daniel landed in another city, the flags were already raised on his accounts. That evening, I finally opened the email. I'd seen weeks earlier, the one titled Asset Transfer Timeline. I read it slowly, line by line. It outlined everything: dates, amounts, even contingency plans if something went wrong. My name appeared again and again, attached to signatures I hadn't written. Seeing it in black and white hurt more than I expected. This wasn't impulse. This wasn't panic. This was intention. I forwarded everything to my lawyer and shut the laptop. Then I waited. The next morning, my phone rang at 6:12 a.m. It was Daniel. Why can't I access the account? He demanded, skipping hello. His voice was sharp, frantic. Did you change something? I yawned, pretending to wake up. I'm not sure, I said softly. Did something happen? Silence, then breathing. Heavy, uneven. They're asking questions, he muttered. The bank flagged something. My pulse stayed steady. Maybe it's just a mistake, I suggested. You always say banks mess up. He hung up without replying. An hour later, he called again. This time, his voice was shaking. They froze everything, Sonia. Everything. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes, not in pain, but in relief. That sounds serious, I said. You should probably talk to a lawyer. Another long silence. That's when he realized, not everything that was happening was accidental. Not everything was out of his control. For the first time since I'd known him, Daniel sounded small. What did you do? He whispered. I looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. Nothing, I replied. I just paid attention. And at that moment, I knew the man who thought he was stealing my future had just lost his own. By the time Daniel returned from his trip, the storm had already hit. Why is everything frozen? He shouted, slamming the suitcase onto the floor. The sound echoed like thunder across the empty living room. I could feel the tension radiating off him, jagged and sharp. Yet part of me almost admired it. The sheer audacity to get caught so completely off guard. I calmly set down my tea, looked at him with the same soft smile I always used when I wanted to lull him into a false sense of security. I don't know what you're talking about, Daniel. Maybe you should call the bank? He turned on me, eyes burning with rage. This isn't happening. I did everything right. I followed the plan. Everything was going to be mine. His hands shook as he gestured wildly. I can't believe this. I walked slowly toward him, keeping my movements smooth and deliberate, as if I were a predator approaching prey. My voice was quiet, calm, deliberate, cutting through the chaos he had created. Daniel, you thought you could take from me. You thought I'd never notice. You underestimated me. He stumbled back a step, shock and fear mingling in his expression. I continued, steady, every word sharp. You didn't just steal from me. You tried to steal my trust, my life, my future. And that, Daniel, is something you can never get back. Then came the clincher, the evidence, the proof. I laid out the folder on the counter, copies of forged documents, screenshots of messages, emails showing his transfer attempts. Even his own voice caught on the phone describing how he planned to move my money. His face went pale, lips trembling. He looked like a man caught in a net he couldn't escape. Everything here, I said, pointing at the evidence, is documented. Lawyers, the bank, authorities, they all know, and they've acted. Daniel sank into a chair, head in his hands. His arrogance, his charm, his schemes, all of it crumbled in front of him, and I felt something strange relief. Yes, but also a quiet satisfaction. Not the gloating of revenge, but the weight lifting, the scales finally balanced. I stood there, calm, collected. The man who had tried to take my life's work, my freedom, my money, had lost everything. His empire of lies collapsed, and I didn't even have to raise a hand. The beauty of it was in the patience, the planning. Revenge, I realized, isn't about anger. It's about precision. It's about letting someone fall into their own traps while you remain untouched. And Daniel had fallen hard. That night, I finally slept, the tension melting from my shoulders. Not because he was suffering, he would have to live with that, but because I had reclaimed myself, my power, my life. For the first time in months, the house felt safe again. And I knew nothing could shake that, not him, not anyone. The lesson was simple. Never underestimate a woman who has been quietly paying attention. The one who smiles while planning is the one who always wins. The next morning, Daniel tried to speak to me again. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, calm, ordinary, while he hovered nervously near the doorway. His hands trembled as he pushed a chair back. He looked like a man trying to summon courage that had already fled. "Sonia, please," he began, voice cracking. "We can fix this." I didn't mean. I held up a hand. The words didn't need to be said. Everything had already been done. Everything had already fallen into place. His excuses, apologies, and desperate pleas bounced off me, powerless and empty. I set the cup of coffee on the counter and looked at him quietly, clearly. "Daniel, the only thing left for you now is to deal with the consequences. I suggest you do it quietly." His face twisted in disbelief and rage. "Consequences? You can't. This isn't fair." Life isn't fair, Daniel," I interrupted softly but firmly. "But justice? Justice can be perfectly fair. And it's happening right now. You brought this on yourself." He slumped into the nearest chair, finally silent, realizing that the walls he had built around his confidence had crumbled. The arrogance that once made him untouchable had evaporated, leaving only the stark exposure of his failure. I spent the day contacting the remaining banks, double-checking every frozen account, making sure nothing could slip through. Every document, every message, every signature he had forged was now safely in legal hands. Daniel had thought he was planning a quiet takeover of my life. Instead, he had orchestrated his own undoing, and the irony wasn't lost on me. Weeks later, I filed for divorce. Not out of revenge, though the satisfaction was undeniable, but out of necessity. Daniel was gone from my life, and the weight of betrayal was lifted. For the first time in months, I felt free. Free to breathe. Free to think. Free to plan my life on my terms. Friends and family asked what had happened. And then there was the final, most satisfying part. The knowledge that he would never forget. Every time Daniel tried to boast or plan, he would remember the collapse, the humiliation, the control he thought he had, and the reality he faced. That memory, constant, sharp, and undeniable, was a reminder that underestimating someone you betray can be your ultimate downfall. As for me, life moved forward. I invested, traveled, focused on myself. The betrayal became a story I occasionally retold, not to relive anger, but to acknowledge resilience, to remind myself that vigilance, patience, and calm calculation could protect everything I had built. The moral was simple. You can't control what people try to do, but you can control how you respond. And when you do it right, when patience meets precision, karma doesn't just arrive. It arrives in style. Because the truth is this: a woman who is underestimated, who is ignored, who is pushed aside. She might just be the most dangerous person in the room. And Daniel learned that the hard way.